What's up, Dragon Brood? So, there's this weird thing going on right now, right? Like, I like playing tribal decks, they're fun. A lot of other players like playing tribal decks. Like, Wizards knows people like playing tribal decks because they've responded as such whenever Rosewater's posted something on Twitter, they've responded that way on surveys. People talk about it a lot of times just in the open, or even when they try to build decks right when a set comes out. So, why hasn't Wizards given more support to tribal stuff? Let's talk about it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they never get it right on tribal stuff, because they do. And I'm only going to review like current standard, because I think if we go back to the whole history of Magic, there's going to be so many ups and downs, like it's going to be hard to try to gauge anything. But I'm more concerned about the most recent year and a half of Magic, because it seems like we've just had several misses for no reason. And what's weird is the parts where they got it right have actually been pretty fun and good, so I'm not sure why they wouldn't do it the rest of the way. And you know what? At the end of this, let's talk about a weird, just big idea that I've had that maybe could help solve part of this problem. So, if nothing else, stick through to the end, and then you could just roast me in the comments for how dumb my idea is. But for now, let's at least start with Throne of Eldraine. Now with Throne, I think we have basically two tribes where they got it right and they got it wrong, right? So first, we'll talk about the good. Knights. Knights turned out really good. And the truth is, a lot of the Knights were also humans, so those just work in a lot of other existing decks. So it's kind of like a double win. So that much we got actually correct, and great. The decks were even competitive for a bit. So that's awesome. The real issue here, and I think this is what this underscores for me, is that when you have a set that has a tribe, especially if it's a new one that we haven't seen much of before, like Knights in this case, if a new player picks up a set, or even a mid-level player picks up the set and wants to build that deck, well, they're going to go spend real time and money to acquire these resources, or, maybe spin their wild cards or whatever it is if you're talking about Arena. And then, sadly, sometimes they'll have a deck that just doesn't work. Fortunately, in this case, with something like Knights, it worked out well. But the flip side of that is fairies, also in the same set. And when you look at the fairies that exist, they don't all really do much cohesively, and sadly, fairies were also a big part of the marketing campaigns. I don't know if y'all remember, but they actually sent out these like postcards that mentioned like the fairy court or something or whatever. So you had people so excited about fairies that old fairy cards were going up in value because people thought, oh, I might need these because I'm going to start playing this deck again, or build this commander deck around this, or whatever. And then it turned out, no, that wasn't it at all, and there was a letdown. So, again, I think this is a case where one got really well done and had a whole tournament deck, and the other one had parts that didn't even work together well in a casual environment. Why can we not balance this? Why can't we just bring up more of them? I mean, Lord knows every set has a bunch of cards that are pretty mediocre. Like, we can just cut some of those and make more flavorful things or powerful things that work for these tribes. And again, before we get any further, I don't want to sit here and say that every single set has to be super tribal based, but if you're going to, especially in this case, make it part of the ad campaign, you at least want them to be impactful. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about Theros. And this one really bugs me because I'm going to count something like Constellations almost as a tribe, because again, it's a thing people are going to try to build. I guess it's more keyworded. But even then, I think we only ended up with two cards, really, that got used in Setessan Champion and the Archon, and that's about it. Nobody really cares about the other things that had Constellation. So even as a theme, they didn't go off. And then there's really no tribes here to speak of that really have any significant interest. They're kind of just all over the place. And I'm not saying you can't have a set without tribes. I mean, go for it. But when you put stuff in there and you want them to work together, at least encourage people to build with the things from that set. The only other thing here that people got excited about a bit were Minotaurs. But one, there wasn't even really enough Minotaurs to build a quality Minotaurs deck, and then for some reason all the Minotaurs cost like 5+. And then the one thing you actually 8 or 9 to cast that lets you get Minotaurs still limits the ones you can put into play to begin with, or how many. So even then, you couldn't even like get creative to get them into play. So why not have more Minotaurs if we're bringing Minotaurs back with that set? Because we hadn't seen much for a while. Would have been a cool idea, but we missed again there. Now, Ikoria gets a little bit more of a pass because this was more about a mechanic than the actual creatures in the set. And I think they got that right when you talk about mutate and cycling. Both things that people like to build around. Casual players love playing these things. As far as mutate goes, competitive players obviously have come around to enjoying cycling. So I don't have too much to complain about that, except we did have an opportunity to really emphasize Beast, because that's the thing about having a bigger, better monster. And, you know, that was the theme and that was the art. And cycling, obviously competitive, mutate, semi-competitive. So nothing wrong with that at all. Then that brings me to Core Set 2021. This to me is one of the more, I don't know, this to me seems like the more stark problem we have. Like sometimes one tribe just doesn't get attention, right? And we're talking about here just looking at cats and dogs out of this set, right? Dogs obviously got best of the best. You got a creature you can sacrifice to give something indestructible. You got a dog that makes all your other dogs indestructible when they attack. You got a dog that when it attacks pumps the power of everything else that's attacking with it. You got a creature that goes and searches for dogs so you can make sure you get them into play, right? Lots of stuff. Cat's got a cat that pumps other cats and occasionally gets to destroy artifacts or enchantment, which, you know, flavor-wise, I kind of dig the idea of a cat pushing a vase off the table and breaking it. That's kind of cool. But what else did they really get? Not much, sadly. You got a cat that gets a counter if you have another copy of the same cat. You got a cat that when it dies makes a human for some reason. Yeah, not a lot of things in standard to make a cat deck work. I'm scratching the bottom of the barrel. There's nothing. And that's kind of the problem there, right? What would have been cool, and to me very simple, would have been to just make cats a mirror of the dogs. Maybe where dogs get things that make stuff indestructible, get things that make stuff hexproof, because the cat will largely ignore you if it wants to, right? That would have been funny and flavorful, and we could have done that across the board. Whereas they get Selfless Savior for the dogs, maybe cats get, I don't know, Attitude Kitten or something, whatever you want to call it. But that would have been a thing we could do, would have been great. I mean, cats are so bad that something like Ren and Ciri doesn't even become a playable deck or card because you don't even want to put cats in there. It's really just dogs and Ren and Ciri and support cards. That's not cool. I mean, we just missed. The fact that we're even sets in now and cats just don't have a lot of support. I was at least thinking, okay, maybe over the next couple sets they would get some. Let's talk about Zendikar Rising. This one, I think we got pretty good on the tribal synergies here, right? Because we got clerics, we have warriors, and we got the party mechanic. All pretty good. And I'll say this, like, the party mechanic, while not perfect, we do know that there are more party things coming over the next couple sets, especially because of D&D being a set all about having a party and adventuring. So I don't have a problem with that. Like, if they have to wait a set, that's cool, but even what's here is still playable. And that to me is what's important. Is we're going to talk about that in another set where that may not be necessarily. But here, we know for sure there's going to be more party stuff. Yeah, the clerics, awesome. I think we hit it. Works perfectly. The warriors, there's enough stuff between this set and other sets to really make that go. This is one where I do think all the different tribes got enough love and it works out great. So this one, we give a good positive check mark to. Moving on. Now, Kaldheim, I have a bigger problem with. And that's because we got a couple of them really right and a couple of them really wrong. For example, we have stuff like elves. We have cards that care about other elves. We have a planeswalker that makes elves, right? Works perfectly, no problems. And then we have a whole pile of other tribes that we introduce that really don't go anywhere. Like there's giants. We've tried a ton of different builds here on the channel, even some recently that just aren't hitting that competitive the way everybody wants, though everybody wants them to be a thing. And again, there's a chance here come 6 months, whenever, or I guess now 4 months, 5 months, whatever it is, when we get to the summer set and the D&D characters, like maybe there's a chance the big D&D villains in that set are giants, because there's been a lot of D&D stuff even lately from Wizards of the Coast that actually references giants. So maybe. But that doesn't necessarily take care of the issue with like shapeshifters. Can we play them as supporting pieces in other decks? A couple of them, maybe, but they don't even fit cleanly the way we want a lot of lists. So that's kind of a letdown. But then you have other cards that make shapeshifters and whatnot that just don't hit the way you want them to. So that's super unfortunate. And I think that's a thing we're seeing with Kaldheim, where there's all these things that got introduced that just didn't get support, like dwarves, as an example. You have Magda and no real support. The other dwarves that are around before aren't great, and we didn't really get dwarves in the set to further support her. I mean, there's not much to be done with that, unfortunately. Another thing is Berserkers, right? Berserkers ended up coming out in this set, basically being the tribe that carries the boast mechanic, and then somehow not being that playable. Even something like Burgi that lets you get double use out of your boast still doesn't even make you remotely incentivized to play Berserker. Now again, Berserker could be a D&D class thing that they choose to carry over in the D&D set, but how many tribes are you going to introduce that you're saying, okay, well, wait another set, right? Again, I think this comes back to my point at the beginning of the video, where if a new player steps in and wants to build a Berserker deck or wants to build a giant deck, they have now spent some amount of their resources, store credit, wildcards, what have you, to build this deck, and really have nothing to show for it, because they're just going to be disappointed that they've depleted their resources to build the thing that should have been easy. Because the way new players or mid-level players look at deck building sometimes is, let me get all the cards that have similar keywords, put them together, and this should do something. Unfortunately, some of these don't do a lot of anything, and that's very disappointing. Very disappointing. Now, where does all that leave us? It leaves us in this world where we get a couple of tribes every 2 or 3 sets that actually go off great. And then we get others that simply just don't go anywhere. And then you're kind of left wondering, like, well, why not? Or when are they going to? Do I hold on to these because maybe in the next set or two, I'll get what I need to make this deck playable? Or do I just toss it to the wayside and be sad that I spent all my resources that never went anywhere? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every tribe needs to be super competitive. I'm not saying standard or whatever needs to be just a bunch of tribal magic. I'm just saying that we do know people really like playing with tribes, so at least make the tribes or test them to a point where they're at least somewhat competitive against the other tribes in the set, even if they're not top tier tournament decks, right? There's no reason you shouldn't be able to have a reasonably consistent giant deck or reasonably consistent shapeshifter deck to compete with other people's angel decks out of the new set, as an example. But right now, we don't. And that's the frustration for a lot of players. I mean, I'm seeing it in comments I get in YouTube videos, I'm in private messages I'm getting, and I feel it too whenever I'm trying to build these decks to try to meet the needs of the viewers, the requests, and it turns out like there's just no good solution there. Now, one thing that I would like to see, like, if I were put in charge of R&D for a day to make a rule for every set to come out, what I would like to see is an additional, let's say, 10 to 15 slots over the normal card limit. We don't, because and you know what? We can do this in the future because we've seen cards added to sets regularly over the last few sets, so it's not even a big deal to make sets bigger or smaller if we want to. So let's add 10 to 15 cards in each set that, at a minimum, add a useful card to each of 10 or 12 tribes, or the most popular tribes at that time, right? So you're always guaranteed to, let's say, get an elf, an angel, a dwarf, a merfolk, or whatever. So even if they're not in the set, even make it to where those cards don't even have to be set related. They don't have to fit the story. Those slots are dedicated just for tribal stuff. How about in Zendikar, we include this one card for cats that maybe gives cats another bonus. Then Kaldheim comes out, and then we get another cat in that set. And then maybe we get one in Strixhaven, and then that's it, right? But you're guaranteed to at least get 3 new cats that do something relevant for a cat deck, and maybe at some point, the cat deck becomes playable, then you can move on from those using the cat slot in those 15 slots, and you move on to the next thing. Maybe it's for giants or whatever else, right? To me, that's a very simple solution, and it makes players happy because then they're guaranteed to have at least 1 or 2 new cards to chase down every set for whatever their favorite tribe or commander deck or whatever is. To me, that would be awesome. And they don't even have to be rares. They could just be filler slots. I don't care. Maybe some of them are rares. I don't know, however they feel like they need to do it in the set. I think that would be a cool solution. Why don't you let me know down in the comments what you think about this type of idea? Or honestly, while you're at it, even let me know if you just like this type of video. Because if so, I have plenty more ideas and lots more to talk about. Also, if you haven't, please remember to like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, because that helps me know that you appreciated this type of stuff, and also lets you get notified every time I have a video up. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.